Victoria Hart had spent most of her adult life in quiet humiliation. At 30, she carried herself with restraint and precision, the kind that came from years of being the invisible member of a family that only celebrated noise. Her achievements, academic honors, career advancements, quiet endurance, were dismissed as distractions. Her parents acknowledged her existence with polite indifference, reserving praise and admiration for her younger sister, Isabel, whose every mediocre success was magnified into brilliance. Isabel had always known how to take up space, and Victoria had always been expected to step aside. The Hart household revolved around performance and appearances, and Victoria, despite her efforts, never played the role they had written for her. She was not glamorous enough, not social enough, not obedient enough. She paid her bills, never asked for help, and sent obligatory holiday gifts. And still, her mother found ways to belittle her. Her father remained silent, offering no defense. Her sister used her as contrast, a backdrop that made her own light appear brighter. Victoria became accustomed to it, trained herself to absorb it like cold rain on skin. Uncomfortable, but survivable. But on that rainy night, something shifted. They had finished dinner, one of those performative family meals that looked warm from the outside, but tasted of resentment. Her mother had delivered the final blow casually, like a line rehearsed long ago. She said Victoria was dead to this family. The words hung in the air, with a finality that no one contested. No one objected. No one looked surprised. Victoria left the table in silence, not out of respect, but because there was nothing left to say. Outside, the rain poured in heavy sheets, soaking her through in minutes. She didn't flinch. She stood still in the driveway, her fingers clenched around her car keys, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The house behind her glowed with warm light, voices still murmuring as if nothing had happened. That house, that family, had never truly seen her. They never would. As water ran down her face and her clothes clung to her skin, something inside her broke, but not in the way they might have hoped. It didn't shatter, it cracked with precision. In that moment, an idea began to take form. Strange, sharp, dangerous. It started as a whisper. What if she disappeared? Not ran away, not pleaded for closure. What if she died, not in body, but in presence? What if she erased herself in the eyes of the world, but kept watching? By the time she turned the ignition in her car, her face was unreadable. Something had ended in her that night, but something else had awakened. Not revenge, not yet. Just the seed of it. The first breath of a ghost. Victoria approached her disappearance with the same meticulous precision she once applied to architectural blueprints. Every detail had to be flawless. The plan began with the purchase of a small used yacht under a pseudonym and the renting of a storage unit on the outskirts of town to prepare the items that would make her vanishing seem real. She spent weeks studying tide patterns, weather reports, and coastal patrol routines. When the perfect night came, a forecast of rough winds, no moonlight, and low visibility, she set her plan into motion. She sailed out alone into the open water, ensuring she was seen by marina staff and nearby boaters before she disappeared from the radar. At the designated point, she released a pre-packed waterproof bag with key personal items into the sea: her ID, some clothing, and a journal entry folded carefully into a plastic envelope. The note was brief but haunting, a farewell written in her unmistakable handwriting, expressing sorrow, detachment, and a desire for silence. She wanted to be free, it said, from expectations and judgment, to vanish into solitude without return. It was the kind of note people didn't question too deeply. Tragic, but final. She abandoned the yacht just before sunrise, using an inflatable raft, paddling silently to a remote inlet where another set of clothes, cash, and a burner phone waited for her. The yacht, left adrift with the motor still ticking over, was discovered later that morning, bumping gently against the rocky shore. When police arrived, they found no sign of struggle, no signs of foul play. just the letter and the absence of a body. The Coast Guard searched half-heartedly, following protocol more than conviction. The case was quietly classified as a likely suicide or accidental drowning. There would be no full investigation. The family held a memorial service more out of obligation than grief. There was no body to bury, only a framed photo set beside a closed casket and a modest arrangement of lilies. Guests came and went in polite silence. No one wept. Her sister Isabel wore a subdued dress and delivered a shallow eulogy. Her mother appeared distracted, speaking more about legal paperwork than remembrance. Within a week, Isabel contacted a real estate agent to list Victoria's apartment. Her mother called their attorney to begin inquiries about transferring assets. Victoria watched it all unfold from a rented bungalow at the edge of a forgotten coastal town, using a pair of binoculars and her new identity, Laura Benson. Her hair was dyed a dark brown, her eyes masked behind colored lenses, her voice altered with practiced control. She no longer looked like the woman who had stood in the rain, broken and invisible. She now moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate. With each article published, each transaction filed, each indifference displayed, she grew stronger. Death, she realized, was not an end. It was a beginning. She had vanished from their world, but she was watching. And in this new absence, she held something she had never known before: control. Victoria had not come back in the way the living do. She returned as a whisper, a signal embedded in static, a thought that crept under skin and refused to leave. From her small, dimly lit apartment outside the city, she built a quiet arsenal: prepaid phones, a high-spec laptop with VPN routing, disposable SIM cards, voice modulation software, and a private server to store hours of surveillance footage. She spent weeks planting hidden cameras in familiar places, leveraging old access codes and timing her visits to avoid detection. She used deliveries, locksmiths, and misdirection, never showing her face, never speaking with her real voice. Her first message was subtle. An unsigned postcard arrived at Isabel's office. On its front, a photo of a lighthouse. On the back, only a date written in sharp black ink. The date corresponded precisely to the afternoon Isabel had stolen Victoria's design portfolio and submitted it under her own name, winning a scholarship Victoria had desperately needed. There was no return address, no message, only the past, reanimated. Isabel laughed it off briefly, but her fingers trembled when she dropped the card into her desk drawer. She didn't tell anyone. Next was Marcus, their half-brother, who had quietly drained Victoria's shared account in the months following her supposed death, citing clerical confusion to the bank. One evening, as he scrolled through sports highlights in his apartment, a text arrived from an unknown number. The message read, "I know what you did," followed by a photo, grainy, time-stamped, of him at the ATM, where he'd withdrawn the last of the funds. His face paled. He deleted the message and locked his phone, but the damage had already begun. He started waking at night, checking the windows, convinced someone was watching. Their mother received something heavier: a simple cardboard box left on her doorstep, unmarked. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a copy of their late grandmother's original will, the one in which Victoria had been named sole heir. This document had vanished after the funeral, replaced with a conveniently updated version favoring Isabel. Alongside the will, in the box's corner, rested an old brooch that had belonged to Victoria as a child, one her mother had claimed had been lost forever. No note accompanied the items, but the implication was deafening. One by one, Victoria targeted the specific cracks in their history, exploiting the things they had buried. Every message, every object, every detail was crafted with surgical precision. She used rented mailboxes across counties, voice lines routed through foreign servers, and handwriting variations she'd practiced for months. To the outside world, it looked like mischief, but to her family, it began to feel like haunting. Their quiet moments grew uneasy. They watched over their shoulders, spoke in hushed tones, argued more. They whispered about curses, hackers, obsessed strangers. Victoria watched from afar, expressionless, as her orchestrated chaos took hold. Each small act chipped away at their confidence. Their curated lives began to show strain. Isabel canceled public appearances. Marcus stopped answering calls, and their mother began installing cameras around the house, double locking the doors each night. She didn't need to confront them, not yet. She only needed to remind them that the dead forget nothing, and that some ghosts don't want peace. They want justice. The unraveling began quietly, with suspicion disguised as coincidence. At first, it was just a change in tone, a clipped word here, a sidelong glance there. Then came the accusations. Isabel, brittle and volatile, confronted their mother after discovering inconsistencies in the property paperwork for Victoria's old apartment. The signature on one document didn't match the rest. The date on another predated Victoria's disappearance. Isabel, already frayed from the anonymous postcard and the absence of sleep, lashed out, accusing her mother of forging legal transfers. Their once carefully maintained facade of unity began to crack. Marcus, already consumed by guilt and paranoia, found himself unraveling faster. He started drinking in the afternoons, then earlier. He jumped at sudden noises, silenced his phone, and kept his curtains closed. His transactions were being reviewed by his own employer after a whistleblower tipped off internal audit. He suspected it was connected to the text he had received. He couldn't prove it, but the timeline haunted him. He stopped responding to family group messages, deleted social media accounts, and spent nights pacing in the dark with a baseball bat in hand. Their mother, always the orchestrator of control, began losing her grip. In response to Isabel's threats and Marcus's retreat, she hired an attorney in secret to revise legal protections and secure the family assets in her own name. But before the paperwork could be processed, several key documents vanished from her safe. Not stolen, just gone. The lock showed no signs of forced entry. Her desk drawer, once organized, looked disturbed. She changed the locks on the house again. She called her lawyer 3 times in one day. No one could give her peace of mind. Then the disturbances became undeniable. The home's security cameras, installed after Victoria's disappearance, began shutting off between 2 and 4 a.m. every night. The footage during those hours showed only black static, as if the house had blinked. Phone lines rang in the middle of the night with no one on the other end. Once, their answering machine recorded a message, a low, digitized voice repeating a phrase their father used to say when scolding them as children, words that only the 3 of them would recognize. Each of them, isolated and suspicious, began to doubt the others. Isabel accused Marcus of orchestrating the psychological warfare to claim a greater share of the estate. Marcus believed Isabel was trying to frame him to distract from her own secrets. Their mother questioned whether someone from Victoria's past had discovered something, or worse, that Victoria had somehow faked her death. But that thought, once impossible, now lingered at the edge of every conversation, like a splinter under the skin. Victoria didn't need to do much anymore. The damage was feeding on itself. She only observed, adjusting details as necessary, nudging their panic along when needed. A new anonymous message here. A copy of an old diary page mailed to the Mother's Bridge Club. A photograph of Marcus's car, taken from an unfamiliar angle, sent to his inbox without explanation. The family, once so polished and dismissive, now moved like fractured pieces on a board, clinging to control but losing coherence. Victoria watched as fear rooted in their throats and bloomed into desperation. She had never raised her voice in their home. She had never been the one with power. But now their nights were sleepless. Their homes felt unsafe. Their memories turned against them. She wasn't just haunting them. She was recreating the powerlessness they had inflicted on her for years. One slow, meticulous ripple at a time. Victoria chose the date with deliberate precision. Exactly 1 year had passed since her orchestrated disappearance, and the family had arranged a memorial service in her honor, partly out of obligation, partly as a thin veil for social posturing. The guest list included distant relatives, former colleagues, and acquaintances who had spoken kindly of Victoria in the past, but never loudly enough to matter. The venue was a local hall rented under the guise of remembrance, decorated with white lilies, candles, and a printed portrait of Victoria framed in glass. Her mother wore black. Isabel arrived in designer mourning. Marcus showed up late, disheveled and pale. Everything was exactly as Victoria had hoped. The gathering felt rehearsed, each guest taking their turn, offering shallow condolences, sharing anecdotes, and nodding solemnly to one another. They spoke of her kindness, her brilliance, her troubled soul, words soaked in insincerity, echoing against the very absence they had helped create. The stage was ready. At the midpoint of the service, as the minister cleared his throat to speak, the lights flickered once, then again. A moment later, the main projector, connected discreetly to a remote signal Victoria had planted 2 days earlier, came to life. The screen behind the altar lit up with a jarring image. Isabel sitting in her office, unaware of the camera hidden in the bookshelf, discussing how she doctored Victoria's portfolio to win an award. The audio played clearly, her voice casual, even amused. Murmurs rippled through the room. Then came Marcus, recorded in a bar, slurring over a drink, bragging about how no one would notice if a few dead girl dollars went missing from a shared account. Another clip showed their mother at a lawyer's office, calmly discussing how to adjust documents to block Victoria's claim to their grandmother's estate, despite knowing the original will favored her. The footage was damning. The silence in the hall deepened with each new revelation. Gasps turned into stunned silence. Some guests shifted in their seats. Others stared, unblinking, as the mask of this family's image crumbled before their eyes. But the final moment was the one that broke whatever composure remained. On screen appeared a video taken only a week prior. Victoria stood in front of a plain black backdrop, dressed in muted tones. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare, her eyes steady and unreadable. She looked directly into the lens, her expression one of controlled fury. Not explosive, but sharpened like a scalpel. There was no sound for several seconds, only the weight of her presence. And then, in a voice altered just enough to sound uncanny but still recognizable, she delivered the sentence that would echo in their minds for the rest of their lives. I watched you for a year. I listened, I recorded, I waited. And now, everyone will see who you really are. The screen faded to black. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the room erupted. Her mother collapsed, fainting in her chair. Isabel fled down the aisle, eyes wide and glassy with panic. Marcus let out a strangled sound, a mixture of horror and disbelief, before stumbling toward the door as if fleeing a fire. But the fire had already burned through them. Victoria had become exactly what they feared most: undeniable, uncontainable, and still alive. In a single hour, she had reversed the narrative they tried to bury her beneath. The service meant to mourn her became a public unveiling of their guilt, and though she was nowhere in sight, her presence filled every shadow in the room. 2 days after the memorial, Victoria returned, not as a rumor, not as a whisper, but in flesh and silence. It was early morning when she arrived at the family estate. The sky was still gray, and the driveway was slick with dew. She walked up the familiar path without hesitation, her steps steady, unhurried. There was no need for secrecy anymore. The damage had already been done. No one came to the door. No one shouted or questioned her presence. The house, once a symbol of control and hierarchy, now stood hollow, a structure stripped of authority. Inside, she moved through the rooms with clinical detachment. The living room, with its curated furniture and polished floors, was exactly as she remembered, except now it looked smaller, almost artificial, like a stage set left behind after the actors had fled. She found the safe behind the bookshelf and opened it with the combination she had never forgotten. Inside were the items they had tried to erase from her life: Her original birth certificate, legal ownership documents, letters from her grandmother, and bank statements connected to the accounts they once drained. She took them all without pause. Upstairs in the study, she gathered the paintings she had inherited, pieces her grandmother had loved and that her mother had tried to sell off quietly. In the back of the closet, she located a locked box containing hard drives and financial records, evidence of manipulation, theft, and forgery that had never been meant for her eyes. She took those too. She made no effort to conceal her actions. She did not rush. There were no alarms, no confrontations. The house remained still, its inhabitants scattered or cowering in their rooms. They had seen her face on the screen, and now they saw her in person. But no one stopped her. Guilt had silenced them more effectively than any scream could have. Before leaving, Victoria placed a folded note on the kitchen table. It sat beneath the vase of decaying memorial lilies, their petals curling inward like secrets. The note was short. No threats, no explanations. Just a sentence they would never forget. "You said I was dead, so be it. But now you will live with my ghost." She closed the door behind her without looking back. There was no need. Everything she had come to reclaim was in her possession. The rest, what remained of the family, their names, their reputations, was already crumbling under the weight of truth. Victoria drove away as the sun began to rise, the road ahead quiet and open. She carried no vengeance in her chest, no satisfaction, only stillness. She had buried her former life, not in the ground, but in their memories. And in doing so, she had unearthed her own freedom. For the first time in years, she felt untethered. Not dead, not forgotten, but finally alive.